All right, well, it is week 8. At least I think it's week 8. I am the White Dragon.
And I am Sir Briz.
And you're listening to the Beyond Unreal podcast. So let's go into a couple of little announcements and tidbits. Then today we'll get into CliffyB's announcements and an in-depth look at the movement. First up, there's been a lot of movement this week on playtesting. In fact, Raxi in the Beyond Unreal IRC channel has set up this amazing system that will create a build and will go and start a server. And so we've had people play testing almost every day. Yep. And he's in fact even been going in, just pulling every custom thing he could find on the forum and including it as well.
Yep.
So if you want to play test, come to the Beyond Unreal IRC channel on Global Gamers.
Yeah, we've both played a few games, and some of our feedback today will be based on that.
Yep. So the next thing is that the Pug guys have created a website, so you can go to UTPugs.com, and they're actually starting to combine the pugs for the different games. So even they're in separate IRC channels, you can see them all from that one web page, or at least that's the eventual goal.
Yeah.
So if you want to play the game today, that's the place to go.
And that's any of the existing games, UT, 2K4,
99,
UT3.
2K4, yep.
Yep.
Right. Next thing is, there was a big media release this week on Fortnite. Tons of information out about it.
Gameplay trailer.
It's looking good. I mean, based on the stuff that the media has said so far, it looks like it's going to be a hit.
Yep.
But this also means they must be getting very, very close. So keep an eye on that. And then the other interesting news this week was that CliffyB announced that he is starting up a new studio and that he will be making a new Arena FPS.
Yes. Yes, and there's basically zero information about it, unless you consider Arena FPS all the information you need to know about something, then there's a lot of information. But for most of us, we want to know anything about it. There's nothing to know about this game right now.
I mean, when I first heard that CliffyB was going to make an Arena FPS, and I heard this before they announced the Unreal Tournament project that we're working on now, I was like excited. I was like, CliffyB, he's been pretty good with the gameplay in the past. I'm sure that he'll do something amazing. He said, okay, I'm going to make an announcement this week. And then the announcement was, oh, hey, we're going to make an Arena FPS. And I'm like, we already knew that. So then he said, oh, okay, we're going to have Ask Me Anything thread on Reddit. So I'm all excited for that. I go in there and they say nothing about the gameplay. All we know is that it's an Arena FPS.
Oh, and that it's free to play.
Oh,
and that it's published by one of the most ridiculous free-to-play companies out there. What's their name? Nexon or Nexion?
Yeah,
or
so
something.
These are the same guys that do MapleStory. So I have a little brother, and he was really into that game. And he's a little bitter about what happened to MapleStory. So that alone, I don't know the company that well personally, but it's kind of interesting. Epic has really gone from this, we're going to do everything ourselves. They've been ultra sensitive about the play to win with Fortnite, and they've taken painstaking steps to make sure that it's not a pay to win game, even though you can maybe buy boosts and cosmetic items, right?
Yeah.
And CliffyB is getting together with a group of guys that, from everything I've read, seems to be the exact opposite, right? He's getting a publisher. It's the kind of publisher that will interfere with your game and put things in there that you might not want to put in there. I don't know. So everything that I see about it right now is kind of train wreck, but I've loved everything that he's done, and I'm sure that he'll do a great job with this, but we'll have to see.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
I don't see a lot of positive news out of this. This is before a decision has even been made, it seems like. All we know is that we want to make this kind of game that's free to play, and that's it. We're looking for people to hire, basically. It's more like trying to bring in some talent than even announce a game.
Wait, don't let that turn you away from going and looking at that Ask Me Anything thread, because he said a lot of really interesting things in there, and including reasons why he possibly left Epic. But I don't really want to speculate too much on that because we really don't have a clue what happened there.
Yep.
So let's get into commits this week. Well, it's actually been 2 weeks now, right?
Yep.
They've added a ton of stuff since then. So going down the list, first of all, they added a bunch of C++ weapons that the community had made, including bio-rifle, flak, minigun. They added a scope to the sniper rifle, which, by the way, looks like crap.
Very basic.
It's very basic. They rigged Malcolm up so you can see him walking around now. Yep. I think it's on Joe's character.
Yep.
That you can see him. And then a bunch of movement mechanics. So let's go down the landing shake. What do you think about the landing shake?
So landing shake is when you hit the ground from a jump or a dodge. It adjusts your view a little bit to make it feel like you're actually landing. So the landing shake, the way that it was initially implemented, was terrible. Basically, before you even touched the ground, it felt like you stopped and there was this huge movement, and it's been adjusted a lot since then. But this kind of prompted us to go back and look at UT and see, how does UT work? And in UT, there is a little bit of this landing shake, but it's almost unnoticeable in regular gameplay. In fact, I had to zoom in as far as I could with the sniper rifle and turn on slow-mo to see exactly what's happening with the landing view shake in UT because it's so subtle. Yeah,
in that thread, when Tiger Claw said there was landing shake in UT and it was essential to the way that game felt, I was like, no, there's not. And so I went and I checked it myself, and I was very surprised to find out that he was exactly right. And not only that, but when I went and I tried to duplicate that in the game, it made a huge difference in how it felt. And all of a sudden, it was the first time that I was playing that game and it was like, this feels like UT to me.
Yeah. A lot of people dislike it, but I think a lot of people dislike it because they remember how it was in 2K4 and how it was in UT3. And both of those games made it feel very heavy. Going back and looking at it, the landing shake in UT3 pretty much one of the main contributors to how heavy that game felt. It's very abrupt. In UT, it was so subtle, and the place where I notice it the most, I guess, is in dodging. So a lot of people were testing it with jumping, and jumping you can see it happen, but in dodging you really feel it happen. And in UT3, dodging and hitting the ground felt very heavy, but in UT, dodging and hitting the ground felt very smooth and effortless. And part of that, I think, is that in UT, the curve of your dodge was consistent until you hit the ground, and then your view was adjusted up. In these implementations, it feels like your curve ends above the ground, and your view is adjusted both down and then back up. And to me, that contributes a lot to how heavy it feels.
So if you look at a picture of it, the view in UT99 kind of looks like a V, whereas the view in the current implementation is a curve with a straight line down and up at the end. It makes sense, right? If you're dodging, it doesn't just like stop and then you go straight down and back up. That's just not how people move.
Yeah.
Now, how they made that happen in UT9 and how you would represent that programmatically to duplicate it in the new engine, I have no clue how they did it, but it'll be interesting to see if they can do that.
That's just part of the getting the feel right. So another part of that too, something that they added, was the weapon bob.
And it is a weapon bob.
Yeah, it's not actually changing. So in 2K4, they actually added weapon bob to your crosshair. And as you would strafe, your crosshair would move up and down with your weapon moving up and down. And it was flat out terrible. Everybody turned it off because it just ruined any possibility of you to aim well. In fact, we posted a video a few weeks ago with the strafing test.
Jim Brown have it off,
yeah, I didn't have it off. It was totally default settings on 2K4, and Jim Brown was telling me that a bunch of people at the Epic offices were watching that video and laughing about how ridiculous the crosshair bob was, and wondering amongst themselves who decided to add that to the game. But so the current implementation in UT4 though is simply the weapon moving. So if you prefer hidden weapons, you're not even going to notice this.
Yep.
This is just purely like a visual thing to make it feel like the weapon's moving as you're running, which is more natural, but it doesn't adjust your crosshair or your view or anything like that.
So, yeah, and I really like that. I'm glad that they made that change, because my primary concern is that you don't want to affect people's aim.
Yeah.
And so, in UT99, the landing shake did not affect your aim. The weapon bob did not affect your aim. So let's move on to the next mechanic that they added, which was the slope boost. I don't know why they call it slope boost.
Yeah.
But this is basically ramp dodging.
Yeah, I think everybody that's talked about it calls it slope dodging just because of how it was used in 2K4. But it was something that existed in all of the previous UT games in one form or another.
So basically, what this is if you are standing next to a sloped surface that is sloped more than 45 degrees, so you can't walk up it, but if you're standing right next to it and you dodge into it, you will go up the slope a little bit. Yep. Your momentum from the dodge will be redirected up the ramp.
Yep.
In 2K4, this was most commonly seen in Rankin, where there were parts of the map where if you dodged against these wooden planks, you could get up to the next level.
Yeah.
It was also important when you were in terrain, because when you're dodging, you can't 100% predict what slope you're going to land on with the terrain.
Yeah.
And without slope dodging, you would basically just get a really short dodge. Whereas with it, you'll just kind of glide over that hill or whatever it is.
Yeah, so the best example of that really is in 2K4 was Antilus.
Yeah.
Because it was in the demo primarily.
Yep.
But there were lots of places where you could slope dodge up hills and get up to the top of a hill. It was used pretty frequently by people that would deathmatch on that level. The initial implementation of this gives you quite a significant boost, so you can make it up a pretty steep incline. Unlike in 2K4 where you can jump in the middle of your slope dodge and it kind of boosts you the rest of the way up. And in fact, in Rankin, that's really required on almost every single one of the slope dodges you can do.
Now there's no double jump.
Yeah.
So kind of what has happened is Steve made that slope dodge a little bit higher to make up for what you were losing without the double jump.
But it does have the effect of making it feel like you're kind of floating up to the top of whatever you're going up. It's a little too aggressive on letting you get up to the tops of things. So there were several people that were saying that the slope dodge made them feel like it's actually going to have fluid movement. So my kind of opinion on it, on some of the jumps they were making, I agree. But on many of the jumps they were making, they were getting so much height out of them. And it just made it feel very floaty. You could get a lot of height out of the slope dodge.
Yeah.
That seemed a little goofy.
Too much. Yeah. And I think most of the comments that I saw in the thread said that it was a little bit too much. So what Epic did then was they made Jim made a character and Joe made a character. Two different implementations of it. Now, Jim's character is basically, there's still slope dodge, but you're not going to get anywhere interesting with it.
Yeah.
It's really just there so that, like, if you dodge into a slope, you don't feel like the slope just stops you abruptly.
Yeah.
So it feels more natural, and you'll definitely still need it for, like, terrain. But you're never going to use it to dodge up a ramp and get to somewhere that you normally wouldn't be able to, right?
Yep.
Joe's implementation, I think he's at 2, so it's about half what
his
Steve's
is about half of Steve's.
But it doesn't feel like you go up half as much, though. I think it's a pretty good balance. It could maybe be a little bit more than what he has, somewhere between the two, but I would be happy with the way that Joe's is as well.
Right. I think that it kind of highlights that there's a difference between how the three of them feel about what slope dodging should give you. Jim, slope dodging shouldn't give you very much height. It should be mostly used for making the game feel natural.
Yep.
Joe, it should give you some height, but it shouldn't be enough height that it's making you fly off into the rafters. And Steve's initial implementation is basically copy what 2K4 could do without having the addition of the double jump.
Yeah, although I would say that I think Steve's slope dodge, as it's implemented right now, is probably more than even what you could do in 2004.
Yeah, probably true.
That big slope in FO8, you can almost get up it, and you would never be able to get up a slope that high in 2004.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
That's why I think why a lot of people said that it was too much.
Well, plus somebody made a video, SatansFather made a video, and it was basically him doing a bunch of slope dodging throughout FO8. One of the things that he really liked was there's this stairway that kind of has a sloped, curved edge around it, and you could slope dodge into that curve and slide along the curve and then dodge out of the end of the curve. The multi-wall dodging there is giving you a little bit of extra feeling. Like you can dodge into a slope and then dodge out of the slope, and it lets you get to places that are a little bit higher.
You can dodge into a rounded wall, basically.
Yeah.
My favorite spot is, again, there's those beveled edges, and there's one where there's a very tiny staircase, and so if you dodge into that beveled edge, it'll put you right on top of the staircase. Mm-hmm. And it's not like a huge advantage, but every time you go by it, you're going to do it. It just feels so right.
Right.
And you can do that with both Joe and Steve's character.
We tried to look at the values that were changed, and there were a few minor changes in jump height and dodge. Was there?
Well, so I don't know about what it was a couple of days ago. So kind of one of the funny things was I saw that these characters were in there, but when you look at the actual commits, you can't see the changes that they made because they're U assets.
Yeah.
And so I went and I made a quick thread and was like, okay, what's the deal with these characters? What are you trying to show with them? And they basically said, neener, we're not telling you.
Yeah.
So I went in to try and figure it out, because the first time that I did it, I could have sworn that, Joe's character didn't seem to dodge as far, or like the gravity was heavier or something like that. But I went in and I tested it today, and I couldn't really tell a difference. So I actually went into the editor and did a comparison. There's actually a tick box where you can see what values in the blueprint are different from what the C++ defaults are. And literally the only thing that's different in it right now is the view bob and the slope boost.
Yeah.
And the view bob values have been overwritten by a commit that they made yesterday, which basically makes it so that you only get the landing shake if you're going so fast. 90% of the time, you don't even get a landing shake. It's only if you drop from really, really high. So let's move on to the sprint. So nothing has changed with the sprint. Now that people have been playtesting a lot more, we're starting to realize some of the gameplay situations that sprint actually affects. When we were doing the playtest, and I'll include this footage in the podcast, I would just walk back and forth until I got the sprint going, and then I'd bust into the room where other guys were fighting and try and get as close to them as possible in a flat kill. And I actually found it to be relatively effective. If you think about the impact hammer, right? If you're using the impact hammer in a crowded server, you're going to get some kills with it.
Yep.
Because in order to avoid getting killed by the impact hammer, you either A, have to kill them before they reach you, which it kind of puts pressure on people and they tend to miss when that happens, or you have to dodge as quickly as you can back, which most people are not doing that when they're moving around in combat, because you're strafing and you're trying to be random and you can't just dodge every opportunity that you have, right? So if you're sprinting and you're making a straight line for them, you can catch up to them quite easily.
Yep.
It is kind of an interesting dynamic. This move actually has an impact on gameplay, but at the same time, it's not terribly fun for me, at least.
Yeah.
Especially having to walk around for 5 seconds to get it going so that you can use it when you enter in the combat is really irritating to me.
Yeah.
And when you're moving around in the sprint, moving is not fun.
One thing that we have to point out here is sprinting is about 20% faster than regular running speed.
Yes.
So you're moving quite a bit faster than the other people in the game are when you're sprinting. And when you move the combat into close range, people get a lot more, the situation becomes a lot more tense. you start having to move your mouse a lot more to track people.
Yep.
Combat.
A small movement when you're that close could mean that the character has to pull a complete 180 to see you.
Exactly. And so now if you consider that you're going 20% faster than this person, you can basically run circles around somebody and they won't be able to track you at all. And then you've got a flak cannon where you're basically controlling the situation. It kind of breaks the existing tense close range gameplay by making certain people move faster. So one thing that people said was that you'll be able to run away because you can sprint too.
Well, no, because it takes 5 seconds for it to ramp up.
You can't run away.
And if you try and walk in a straight line when you're trying to run away, it's not going to work, guys. I'm sorry.
Well, the other part of that too is that there's just still, because the acceleration and deceleration haven't changed in the default characters, there's no good way to strafe away from things.
People have mentioned this multiple times, and when we started doing the playtesting, it became even more apparent. Strafing right now just sucks. Yep. The acceleration is so low that trying to strafe spam back and forth is basically useless.
Yeah, what one of the players called wiggling. In UT, you could wiggle.
Yeah.
There's no possibility for that in this game.
So that means if you're trying to avoid getting hit from a sniper, then it's harder. Now, that really isn't too big of an issue in the playtests that we've had because of lag.
Yeah.
Okay. But the other side of it is that if you want to avoid rocket fire without dodging, you can't. Watch some of the videos that people have posted. You can see that when they're in those situations, they never miss their rocket shots.
Yep.
Because it's so easy to tell where they're going.
Yep.
The issue with that is that this one thing seems to be preventing us from getting good feedback on almost everything else about the thing.
If you don't want to try to play test, the biggest thing is to go on the forums and look at the videos that a couple of people have posted playtesting. But when I watch like SatansFather's video of the playtesting that we did with him, you could just tell like your movement in relation to another person and their movement around on your screen just feels a little bit slow still.
When you're looking at the videos, one of the things that I would tell you to pay attention to is look at the other characters.
Yeah.
Because when you're moving around the level, there's a lot of things that destroy your perception, especially when players are looking around everywhere and their view is darting around really, really quickly. It makes the game seem like it's faster than it really is.
Yeah.
But when you start watching the characters, you realize that there's something about their movement is too slow.
Yeah. The other thing I would recommend too, because I've had to do this myself, is watch them without sound, because the sounds that they have in there right now are the UT3 sounds, and that does bias how your perception of the movement is.
Yep.
For me, when I watch with sound, the movement sucks. It feels heavy. It looks terrible. But when I watch it without the sounds, I can actually see the components that make up the movement, and it makes it much easier for me to tell what things need to change.
Right. The next thing is the gravity. Gravity affects primarily one thing: how fast you fall.
Yeah.
So you need to take out the jump and you need to take out the dodge and just make a really tall cliff and walk off the cliff and see how does falling off that cliff feel.
Yeah.
So that's what I was doing today, and it's hilarious. You fall so slowly. So I went and I made a spiral staircase that was 20,000 units high. It took me like 3 minutes to walk up to the top of it. And you can jump off the whole thing and you just kind of gracefully float to the ground. And when you land, you only take 70 damage. But I had a tower that was basically like twice as tall as the face tower. And it didn't kill you. And falling down just felt stupid. Let's get that right first, and then we can look at the jump and the dodge.
There's a problem that I'm seeing right now with the communication that Epic's doing in terms of the movement. And the challenge, I realize they have a really tough challenge here. But to me, I would personally like to see more feedback on people's thoughts on the movement values. And I don't necessarily think that their values are wrong, but I would like to see justification. So it would be nicer if they would come in and say, here's why we just chose to go with this value for this. And what are your thoughts on that?
I would like to see a little bit more of an attempt to try and guide the discussion, because what's happened so far is an issue will be brought up, and then if it's a really controversial thing, we're still talking about it, right? In Epic's defense, it seems like what they're trying to do right now is just get every system in place first before they really start to do that sort of a thing. But I think the community feels like in some instances that they're spinning their wheels, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's especially acute with the whole dodge jump thing. And I definitely feel the pain of the people on the pro dodge jump side of the argument, because everything that we've done so far has basically been with the assumption that there's not going to be a dodge jump in there. So the dodge jump players are seeing all of the movement property tweaks being made and aren't participating because all of the tweaks that they're seeing are made with the assumption that there's not going to be dodge jump.
Yeah.
If Epic still wants us to talk about dodge jump, which it seems to me like they do, I think that they should make more comments about it to kind of guide the discussion, to say, if we're going to have dodge jump or we're not going to have dodge jump, these are the things you're going to have to convince us on.
Yeah, and I think that that's my biggest concern with that right now. So it feels like on the art side of thing that people are getting a lot of feedback, and Epic's being pretty communicative, but on weapons and movement and some of the other core things, it feels like they're not really talking about how they feel about different things. Like when we say acceleration is bad, we're basically talking in an echo chamber, because most of us feel like the acceleration isn't very good. And Epic's never coming in and saying, well, we're not going to increase it for these reasons, or we may increase it, but it has these ramifications, or any of that kind of stuff.
And yet we know that they've read them, right?
Yeah.
So, like, one of the things that was funny this week is, well, with the whole landing shake stuff, right? They put it in. There was a lot of activity on the forum, and they committed code based on that feedback.
Yeah.
But like 90% of the player base, or the people that are arguing, don't necessarily know that that's happening or see that in the conversation, because nobody ever came back into that thread and said, hey guys, I changed it this way, what do you think now?
Yeah.
They should reply to the post and say, I made this commit because you said this.
Yeah. I feel like this is the way Epic wanted to develop previous UT games. But this is a game where we're starting from scratch, guys. You have every opportunity to come and talk to us and tell us why you're thinking everything you're thinking. And we might disagree with you, and Joe Wilcox told us, argue and argue again, and I'm going to do that until my eyes bleed. But even if I disagree with the decisions Epic is making, I'm going to play this UT game. If they put dodge jump back in, I'm going to play this UT game. For me, it's not the specifics of all these mechanics. There's a UT game that I want, but that UT game may not be what I get, and I'm going to keep playing this game anyway. And I want to know why Epic is deciding on this feature or that feature. Why did they decide to put landing view shake in? They never explained that to us.
Right.
But there is a reason for it, and I think we've probably come up with a lot of good reasons for that mechanic to exist. But I would like to hear their reasoning for things like that.
Well, I think it's fun for them to play God, right? Because they basically have the ability to go and put something in the code and go, I wonder what they'll think of this. Yeah. You know, I can tell they're definitely reading things and they're changing things based on it, but they aren't actually going on the forums and saying that.
Yep.
Part of me thinks that they just like trolling us to see us argue about it. And I think the other part of it is that the argument is exhausting, right? Yep. Not everybody is like Briz that likes to just post and post and post, and we could go on forever. But that's just the way that it works, right?
Yep.
And unless Epic comes in and says something, that conversation is just going to continue to go in that direction and stagnate.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. As always, please like and subscribe to our channel.
And if you're interested in playtesting, come to the IRC channel. There's always people in there, and there's often opportunities to playtest in there.
Yes. All right, we'll see you next week.
Blue flag dropped. Blue flag returned.